Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Drew Blackwell, a member of the Etobicoke Lakeshore NDP Riding Association, and I'm part of a group that started as Cine Politica in Toronto-Danforth and now involves volunteers from across the city. Every couple of months, we organize a webinar to explore an important current issue in depth. And to begin tonight's event, here is David Langille from Toronto-Danforth, precisely to acknowledge the land we are on.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. We acknowledge that the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you.
Okay, a few weeks ago, looking at rising youth employment figures, the confusing and uncertain work environment that many people face today, and increased blaming of immigrant workers, we thought it would be important to examine some of the many factors affecting the future of work. So we talked with Jim Stanford, the director of the Center for Future Work, and then decided to focus on the gig economy. We're really pleased to have Jim with us tonight, along with two really interesting people you will soon meet. A gig worker who organized a union of food delivery bike riders, and a policy researcher with OPSU who's examining the gigification of public sector jobs, particularly in the health sector. Now, here's Susan again to explain the ground rules for the event.
Thank you. Yes, and it does say Toronto-Danforth NDP Riding Association here, but I'm Susan McMurray from Toronto-Danforth NDP and other places. Thank you for joining us tonight. We do keep everybody muted except for the presenters and the organizers, just to make sure that there isn't a lot of background noise. So thank you for that. And in place of that, we invite you to use the chat for questions, for comments, and other things like that. Our moderator, Jessica Bell, will later on be asking you to continue putting questions and comments in there because once the panelists have finished and she's moderating the discussion, she'll be able to make use of those. And you might even be able to get some answers to some of your questions from the panelists in real time before the moderated debate happens. A final comment that the event is being recorded and it will be available on different websites in the future for if you want to go back and check anything, or if you want to share it with your friends, and we'll be wrapping up at 9 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, just to reinforce here, we're especially pleased that Jessica Bell, the Shadow Minister of Finance in Ontario, agreed to guide the discussion. Jessica herself has experience in organizing and empowering groups without a voice. She helped create and directed the TTC Riders Association that won better service and lower fares. So with that, welcome everybody, and here is Jessica.
Nice to have you all here. It's really, it's a bit of a privilege to be moderating a conversation around the nature of work. The reason why is because the provincial government has so much influence over workplace rules, from employment benefits, workplace safety, to what we can do to regulate gig work and move towards an economy where we can all have decent work, where it's easier to unionize, and where we're earning enough to afford to live in a very expensive province. So I have the privilege of moderating this conversation tonight. We have some presenters, and then we're going to be going to questions and conversation once the presenters have spoken. I'd like to introduce our first presenter. Jim Stanford is a Canadian economist, author, and commentator, and he's currently the director of the Center for Future Work. Jim, start us off. Give us an overview of the gig economy. What is it? How is it affecting labor markets and the world of work?
Jessica, thank you very much, and the organizers for this event. Real privilege to join you all, and thanks to all the audience. Special thanks to the subsection of the audience coming from Calgary that I see online there, who happen to be my family, my parents and my sister. So that's very sweet. And no one can be mean to me because my mom is watching. Okay, so just keep that in mind, people. Anyways, I'm so glad to join the discussion. So glad that the different writing associations are working so actively to understand what's happening in the world of work and what the progressive alternatives to this situation will be. I'm going to share some slides to walk through this. So here we go. Just give me a moment to get it all started. Hopefully you're seeing those. Okay. So understanding and challenging platform work. What is it anyways? Is it new? Why it matters and how to fight back. I do want to put in a plug for our website at the Center, centerforfuturework.ca. Everything we do is open access there, and we've published several different reports and briefings, testimonies on gig work, what the problems of the current model are, and how to fix them. You can sign up for our mailing list there or follow us online on all of the platforms. 4 of them now, not just Twitter anymore, which means I waste 4 times as much of my life doing this social media stuff. But anyways, you have to. I think that the whole debate over the platform economy, I think, is a more appropriate word rather than gig work. The whole debate over the platform economy really encapsulates the gap, the cognitive dissonance between all the hype about new technology and the incredible innovation and the amazing things that robots can do and programs can do and apps can do and algorithms can do, some kind of brave new world. And then the gritty reality of so much work in the so-called high-tech platform system. And Uber, the owners of Uber and the other platforms all claim that this is an innovative new direction for our economy, and that the old rules of the game, old-fashioned things like a minimum wage, just don't apply because this is innovation, folks. This is technology. This is the new world. And the new world seems to involve poor, desperate people hopping on a bike or hopping in a car to deliver fast food to other people who maybe aren't quite as poor and desperate as they are, so they can afford to get their McDonald's food delivered to their house. First of all, why anybody wants McDonald's delivered is still beyond me. It's barely edible when you're getting it right then and there, let alone half an hour later. But here's the key thing. Hiring someone and instructing them, a poor person, to deliver food to someone else or to pick up someone and drive them somewhere else isn't new. It's not novel. It's not innovative. And the bicycle that this person is riding, the bicycle was invented in 1860. So that ain't innovation, friends. Okay. So, and ultimately the fact that this person is barked at, gets their orders over a smartphone rather than some jerk of a supervisor telling them, where to go and pick up the food and where to deliver it, doesn't fundamentally change the nature of this undertaking. So this is an enormous opportunity to challenge the myth about technological determinism and the fact that supposedly the old rules have to be thrown out because this is a new system. This isn't a new system. Telling poor people to do menial, low-paid tasks for other people is as old as capitalism. And it's a lie when the companies say that technology means new ways of exploiting people are inevitable. So I think that the debate over platform work ties into all kinds of other things, including other forms of insecure or non-standard work, but also this bigger debate about technology and what role we ascribe for it. Is technology the villain or the savior, or is it neither? I say neither. And I reject this idea that these changes are being forced on us by some kind of external force called technology. Technology is nothing more and nothing less than the sum total of human knowledge. It's a fundamentally human thing. The compilation of our understanding of how we can use tools to make our work better, supposedly, and how it affects us depends on how it's used, which is all about choice. It depends on what type of technology is being developed, what problems we're trying to solve when we put the engineers and the scientists to work, and then how the resulting ideas and innovations are applied and how the costs and benefits are shared. So that's all about human choice and human agency, not about some kind of external technological force. And the great irony is, even though we think about technology being tools that are used in work, more of the impact is actually felt through the changes in relationships rather than the production process itself. And this is obviously clear in the food delivery or ride share end of platform work. That production model hasn't changed one iota. Hopping on a bike and delivering food is something that happened 50 years ago. Getting in a car and picking up someone and driving them from point A to point B is something that happened 50 or 100 years ago. So the production process itself hasn't changed. All the technology has changed is the relationships through which that work is organized, managed, disciplined, and compensated. And in that regard, again, there's nothing new. Bosses have always tried to use technology to intensify the work process and find ways to extract more profit from each hour of work, including supervising work, intensifying work, monitoring and surveilling work, and ultimately hiring and firing the workers. And the platform economy is one of several areas now where people can be hired and fired without ever seeing another human being, which is interesting. It's not the drivers whose jobs are at risk from technology. It's the managers, because now it's the algorithm deciding who works and who isn't. So how I understand platform work is in this kind of continuum between work, employment, and jobs. Work is the generic category that includes all productive human effort, using our brains and brawn to produce goods and services that are useful to us. And that includes paid work, unpaid work in any sector of the economy. Employment is a subcategory of work where you're doing the job for someone else at their direction. They own the value that you create through your work, and then they compensate you in some way. Could be through an hourly wage, could be through a monthly salary, could be through tips, could be through commission, could be through the little bit of the fare that Uber lets the driver keep. Okay, but they're still being compensated for their work that they're doing under someone else's direction. Now, in legal terms, the Uber driver is not an employee, but that's a completely superficial distinction. They're still clearly directed by Uber to do certain tasks, and they're just using this artifice of being a self-employed contractor as a way to avoid normal obligations, like the minimum wage. So employment is there, and then jobs are particular ways of structuring and organizing employment so that you know how the work is being organized and who's in charge and how people are compensated. So new technology is not eliminating work. I can assure you of that. Workers are as essential as they ever have been. It is not eliminating employment either. In fact, the share of Canadian people in wage labor relationships of one kind or another, and I include Uber drivers in that share is growing, not shrinking. So we are not all shifting to become self-employed entrepreneurs running our own gigs. In fact, there's more employment, not less. What is changing is jobs, how we organize the jobs and structure them, and what type of benefits and security workers have in that. And generally changing those jobs for the worse. Because of all kinds of things that have been happening. Technology is part of it. Technology is a tool that employers have used to restructure the nature of jobs in their favor. But technology is not causing this. What's causing this is the changing relationships between human beings, some of whom are billionaires and own platform companies, and others who are desperate workers who will sign on to an app in order to get a few hours of work at sub-minimum wage compensation. That's what's changed. And the fact that labor law has allowed it to happen because of the passivity of regulators. So the overall capacity of a kind of dog-eat-dog, hyper-competitive, very insecure, non-standard labor market is key to understanding how platform work came about. It wasn't because of technology. It was because of the fact that the economy is managed in a way where there's groups of people who are desperate for work, even very low-paid and insecure work, concentrated in non-tradable services. That overlaps with the general shift towards the deregulation of the labor market and the relaxation of former protections and standards that allow this. And it also taps into who's around to do that work. And this is where the inequality in Canada's labor market and the to's and fro's of Canada's erratic immigration policy are all about how a pool of desperate workers who is essential for the Uber business model is maintained. So let's talk a bit more about platform work. Is it even new? What are the key defining features? Number one, there's no commitment to continuing work. Your work depends immediately and completely on there being a task for you to do. So you're working on an on-call basis. You aren't paid by the hour or the day or the week. You're paid for each particular task. That's like piecework compensation. The workers have to take on responsibility for providing the equipment that they use for the work, whether that's a bicycle or a car or home computing facilities for people doing platform work in technology. And there's always a triangulated relationship between the person doing the work, the end user of the work. That could be a consumer getting their McDonald's delivered by Uber Eats. Again, I have no idea why you'd do that. And then the third point of the triangle, the end user could be a consumer. That could be another business. Think about IKEA or Amazon or other big companies that are using platform work to do services functions that are essential to their business. So it's not just the consumers who are using this system as the end users. It's many businesses as well. And then the third point on the triangle is the intermediary, the so-called middle person who supposedly connects the worker with the end user and then creams off a big chunk of the resulting money. The other thing that's clearly related to platform work is it uses a smartphone. Whoopie doodle doo. So you're getting your instructions on a web-based app on your phone rather than somebody sending you instructions by a radio or just yelling in your ear the old-fashioned way. So I don't consider that a fundamental change. You're still getting the instructions from someone else. So these practices are as old as capitalism. I said they're hundreds of years old, and this idea that this is a new wave in the economy is quite wrong. It's back to the future big time. The idea of homework, for example, very common in the early years of industrialization in Europe, the so-called cottage industry system, or the putting out system, as it was called, where home workers with simple equipment, in this case a loom, would get their raw materials from a merchant capitalist. Their employer was a merchant capitalist who provided them with the raw materials. They take the raw materials home, convert them into some kind of finished product. It might be textiles, clothing, footwear, simple housewares. Take the finished product back to the merchant, get paid for their work, and then wait for another gig. So guess what? That's the gig economy right there. All these people are missing is a smartphone to get the instructions. So let's give her a smartphone, okay? And now we've got the gig economy writ large. The putting out system from the early 18th century, now high-tech gig work. We could call it puttingout.com, puttingout.com. Could be the website for this new business. No, on second thought, puttingout.com doesn't work. We'll find another name for this. But at any rate, the practice, hundreds of years old. Piecework compensation, hundreds of years old. Employers have always tried to make workers be their own boss by pushing them to work harder and faster with piecework compensation. Nothing new there. It has its applications. It's still used in many places today. Some factories have it as a bonus system. The only thing is that those factories are still required to make sure that on a piecework compensation basis, they're still making at least minimum wage. And that's what Uber is trying to avoid with their model. And piecework has its limitations. There's some places it's effective, some places it's not. When you work in teams, when you're more concerned with quality than quantity. On-call work, also around for hundreds of years. Think about agriculture, mining, manufacturing. These are longshore workers at the docks. They used to go down to the docks every morning, see if there was a ship that they could work on unloading. They might get tapped on the shoulder to do the work, but if not, go home, come back tomorrow. And then this idea of triangulated intermediation between the workers, the end users, and the middle person. In this case, the gangmaster, the old gangmaster system in Europe, where they would round up some desperate workers, take them to a farm or a field or a mine or a factory for a day's work, and then the fat cat gangmaster keeps half their wages. Nothing new under the sun. These things are all as old as capitalism itself. And so we have to reject this claim that because of so-called technology, Uber doesn't have to pay minimum wage anymore. The effects of platform work are insidious. The more this model spreads, the bigger the dangers become. It shifts all kinds of risks and costs to the people doing that work. It enables employers to do an end run around normal employment standards like minimum compensation, basic benefits like employment insurance and CPP, workers' compensation, severance, and other basic employment rights. It undermines government revenue because by doing that end run, the companies are depriving government of funds for those important programs, shifts the burden instead to other taxpayers. If those workers don't have workers' comp, if those workers don't have a pension, then when they retire or if they're injured, they just fall back on the straight up public system. They fall back on old age security and GIS. If they're a poor retiree, they fall back on the public healthcare system if they weren't covered by WCB. So that's an all-out shift of the burden to the rest of us. We are subsidizing Uber every fare because of how they evade those normal things. It distorts the competition between Uber and its competitors who might follow the rules. This is true for package delivery, for example, which is a huge area for gig employees or big gig work. Where traditional companies, not just Canada Post, but companies like Purolator or United Parcel Service or FedEx, who pay their workers actual wages and pensions and the other things, cannot possibly compete with a system that allows people to be recruited for less than minimum wage and none of those impacts. I've been thinking about the impacts on productivity. We often hear that Canada's in a big productivity crisis. Well, imagine that. We've got a whole industry hiring hundreds of thousands of people who typically spend at least half their time sitting around doing nothing and getting paid nothing for it because the system does not pay for waiting time. And the system has no incentive for the companies to try and use labor more efficiently. It's an enormous drain on productivity and lots of other external consequences like road congestion, pollution, what it does to neighborhoods, this Airbnb model and how it's distorted and undermined quality and safety in different neighborhoods. The ways that platform workers are exploited by this model, they are not paid for the waiting time, which is an enormous waste of time, an enormous form of exploitation. They don't get their expenses directly reimbursed. Their take-home pay, many studies have shown, is often below the minimum wage. Sometimes it's higher than the minimum wage, and we always hear about, somebody who's had great luck and great skill and earned $100,000. That's usually before they've even deducted the car expenses. The dispatch system is very arbitrary and completely controlled by the company. It's not like a taxi system where you sign up for a certain area and your turn will come. You're completely at the behest of the platform, waiting for another job. And you're also at the behest of the platform about how much you'll get paid. It isn't even like a taxi system anymore where you get a certain amount paid per kilometer. It's built into the algorithm that Uber and the others use to offer the job to a driver with all those judgments baked in. And now we've learned that Uber uses its data on the past behavior of its drivers and other companies to suss out who on their list is going to be the most likely to accept a job, even though the pay is very low. So this is a form of algorithmic pricing or surveillance pricing. We heard Abby Lewis yesterday, an excellent intervention calling on the federal government to ban surveillance pricing for consumers. This is an application of exactly the same insidious, creepy technology into setting the price of labor. That is, how much each worker is paid will be based on data that the company's got in the past. A key feature of these platforms is the fact that the employers don't take responsibility for thinking through how many workers they're going to need to meet expected demand at any one point in time. They just outsource that job to the self-management of the drivers who self-select whether to sign on to the app at any given point in time or not. And that self-judgment depends on both how much they're likely to get paid for a ride, but also how long they're going to have to wait between rides. And this is very important for us to understand that endogenous labor supply can defeat efforts that are supposedly aimed at improving the compensation of platform workers that don't take into account this flexible endogenous labor supply. As long as there's a group of people who are willing and able to sign on to the app to make a few bucks, even if it isn't minimum wage when all their time is taken into account, then anything you do to increase how much they get paid for each particular job will be defeated because there'll be more people who sign on because the increase in what you're getting paid can now offset a somewhat increased waiting period until you get paid and until you get one of those jobs. So this is very, very important around the debate about engaged time, which is important in any of the reform proposals around platform work, including the one from Doug Ford's government in Ontario. They say, well, we'll ensure that they get minimum wage for the engaged time, which is only the time between when they pick up the food and when they deliver it. The waiting time is still free. And even if you increased that engaged time a little bit, without any kind of limits on how many drivers are on the system, or any kind of requirement that waiting time is compensated, not just engaged time, then it will have zero impact on the final take-home pay of the platform workers, because the increase in what they make while they're on a job is offset by an increase in the amount of waiting time. The solution to that is either to pay for waiting time or to limit the number of drivers on the road at any given point in time. And either of those approaches have been taken by other jurisdictions. New York City limited the number of drivers. The Europeans ensured that they paid for minimum wages. Now, there's been lots of debates and some kind of gestures, I would say, from different governments about what they think should happen. Uber and the others say that, well, we'll pay a little bit more for waiting time, or we'll throw in an extra, or not for waiting time, for engaged time, or we'll throw in an extra buck per ride for something. The dishes one, what the hell is the dishes one called? I never use these things, so I forget what they're called. Skip the dishes. Skip the dishes announced they're going to pay an extra 50 cents per 50 kilometers for, no, $1.50, sorry, $1.50 for 50 kilometers for helping to offset the high gas prices. None of these things are going to make a significant difference. There are jurisdictions around the world, New York, I mentioned, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, that have been more forceful in defining platform workers as employees, ensuring that the basic employment standards are applied to them, and lifting their wages and conditions accordingly. BC has done a little bit better than Ontario by including the workers' comp in it all, but the focus on engaged time is still an enormous loophole that both allows the companies to sidestep their normal responsibilities and defeats any kind of ultimate impact on the take-home pay of drivers, because it's going to be offset by greater waiting time. One route that I think could happen at where the federal government, even though provincial governments have most responsibility for labor law, the federal government can make a big difference here by requiring Canada Pension and Employment Insurance to be collected from all hours of platform work. That alone would force all the companies to now start counting hours instead of just relying on people's desperation to be the motivator for more labor supply. We have had experience with platform work. As again, I said, it's hundreds of years old, and workers have been fighting for more secure and fair payment, including in so-called gig jobs. In fact, the term gig work comes from the original gigs in the theater and stage industry, and strong unions were able to organize and set standards for how jobs like that would work. Same goes in trucking and construction and other occupations where people go from gig to gig. So it can happen, but we have to be fighting back in all forums, including organizing unions, fighting at labor boards, and ultimately pushing governments to do a better job of protecting these workers. At the end of the day, this is just dated myself with this image here. This is Terminator when the robots came from the sky. The robots are not in charge. Human beings are in charge, and we have to forcefully reject this idea that this is all driven by technology. It isn't. It is driven by greed and the fact that governments have failed to ensure that the traditional rules are applied in these new business models. And that's the ultimate source. Technology could actually help. We could use some of the technology that is wielded in the platform sector to create delivery business that involve people working in different nodes and picking up different types of parcels or picking up different types of food from different restaurants. There's a germ of potential efficiency in that, but there's absolutely no reason why that has to go along with a model that says minimum wages are outdated. That's nonsense. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Jess, for your chairing, and for the organizers, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Okay, try again. that doesn't make sense. Let me. Here's what I
Okay, now it works. Thank you. I got kicked out and then I came back in again. Thank you so much, Jim. I really enjoyed hearing about how gig work is not new. And it's the same old issue of very wealthy people taking advantage of people who desperately need work. It presents the whole drive for this advance this new technology. It presents it as not just this inevitable juggernaut, but something that we can challenge and fight back on, which is a perfect segue because our next speaker does exactly that. Jennifer Scott is the president of Gig Workers United. Jennifer, I'd love it if you could share your experience of being a food delivery gig worker and also the experience of what it is like to organize a union of gig workers.
Sure. Thank you so much. I started delivering on apps like DoorDash and Uber Eats in 2017 in Toronto. I thought it would be a good job, but it really, really wasn't. Like a lot of people who come to this work, I started delivering on one app. I worked as hard as I could. I worked very close to full-time hours. And after a couple of months of delivering on that app, the wages went down. And so I got on another app, and 6 months later, another one, and another one after that. And this is pretty standard for this work. Maybe to give you an idea of what it looks like on a day-to-day basis, I typically preferred not to deliver in my neighborhood. My neighborhood is just outside of downtown and has a lot of really steep hills. And so I would start my day by biking to downtown to an area that I thought might be busy. It was near a lot of restaurants. And I would go online in the app, tell the app that I'm ready to work. And then I would have to wait until I got an order. And that could be 10 or 15 minutes, or it could be 45 minutes to an hour. I have no control over how long that takes, or over how much the order pays once it comes, or where it's going and how many kilometers it is, and if it's uphill or downhill or back the way I came. I control none of those things. My choice is just to take the order and make some money or continue sitting on the side of the road not making any money. So for some of those reasons, my coworkers and I organized to unionize our workplace. And so this was in 2018, 2019. It was the app Foodora, which I don't know, maybe some of you remember. And because app employers say that we are independent contractors, which we know is not true, the unionization process had an extra step. We couldn't just talk to our coworkers, sign union cards, submit them to the labor board, and certify our union. We had to put together an argument and prove that we were misclassified workers, that we're not independent contractors, but that we're employees. And in 2020, the Ontario Labor Relations Board ruled that Foodora couriers were employees. This was the first time in Canada that there'd been any kind of ruling like this. And when we finally got to open the ballot box and see how many workers voted yes for a union, in a precedent-setting vote, we saw that 88.8% of workers voted yes for a union. I mean, that's not a close call. That's a lot of people who wanted a voice and who wanted change. In April or March of 2020, Foodora declared bankruptcy. And this was right at the beginning of the pandemic, right as food couriers were being declared independent contractors. The employer just left the country. And everybody who worked for Foodora, not just in Toronto, not just unionized workers, but everybody across the country lost their jobs. But because we had organized worker to worker, real on the ground, worker led organizing, we had built collective power and we leveraged that. And without having to go to court, without needing to have lawyers intervene. We won a settlement that looked like severance pay for all workers across the country. That was our second really big win. And after the settlement was paid out, which took, I think, about 7 months, after Foodora announced their bankruptcy, we had a lot of conversations in the union. We talked about, what are we going to do? Are we ready to stop organizing? Are we ready to, what are we going to do? And most people were like me. We deliver on more than one app, and this is the only job that we have. So we decided to create Gig Workers United. And so this would be another union campaign to unionize our workplace, but it wouldn't just be about one app or one city. It was for workers on all apps in all cities, everywhere we could reach. That was our goal. And not long after that, Uber began lobbying the Ontario government, where they found a friend in the Ford government. They wanted to, at that time, what they wanted to do was change the Employment Standards Act so that they could add in a third category of worker. And I don't know how familiar folks are with that, but maybe a good way to think about it is that the Employment Standards Act is like a floor, and workers stand on that floor together. And through things like organizing or having a union, we reach up towards and achieve better working conditions. But we all stand on the same floor. For the government to change the Employment Standards Act the way that Uber wanted them to, they would have to add a ceiling. The gig workers would be stuck underneath. And that's not the spirit of the Employment Standards Act, and that certainly doesn't work for working people. This would be something that would have affected everybody in Ontario and not just gig workers. So we paused organizing to win a union, and we started organizing to stop our employer from changing the law. And we had rallies. We organized with the Ontario Federation of Labor. Members wrote submissions on the consultation process to the government, wrote letters, testified at the provincial legislature, did all of the things. And the government did not change the Employment Standards Act, but they did implement payment for engaged time, minimum wage for engaged time, which I think is a loss for all of us. Uber's insistence that our understanding of what minimum wage is, this long-held win that workers are paid from the time they're at work until the time they leave work, is now changing. Gig workers are not paid for all of the time that we're at work. There have been studies done in California, in Seattle, and the city of Toronto did their own study on how much time gig workers spend at work that is engaged time versus unengaged time. And typically those studies all kind of agree. They're just within a few percentages from each other usually. And about 40% of the time that we spend at work is unengaged time. So when workers are being paid minimum wage for engaged time, for the time that they have a passenger in their car, if they're doing rideshare, or a delivery in their bag, or if you use shopping services, they're shopping for your groceries, that is typically 60% of the time that they're at work. 40% of the time, we are not paid. And again, only apps control what that looks like. So they can shift it so that it's more or less to whatever suits them in that moment. Gig workers continue to organize. Sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. Sorry, that felt really good. Gig workers continue to organize. And there's a lot to organize around. One of the ways that app employers profit and benefit, it's not just not paying into EI and CPP. It's not just not paying minimum wage. It's also downloading the responsibilities of running the business onto literally everybody else. Workers pay for a fairly high-end smartphone to have capacity to run the app, the data plan to receive the orders and communicate with the app, bicycle, e-bike, car, maintenance, gas. In this economy, gas to get paid, $1.50 for a delivery. All of your PPE, delivering in extreme heat or extreme cold. When you're injured, paying your rent when you can't work, all of these costs are paid for by workers. Apps don't contribute anything. And more than that, it affects our communities. I'm sure if folks here are from Toronto, you've seen that there has been a debate about the number of bike couriers in Toronto versus the amount of road space available, as well as the safety issues that that creates. When you deliver on apps like Uber or Skip the Dishes, there is no guarantee that you will have a job tomorrow. Apps have the ability to terminate you without any notice or fair warning, or the ability to try and get your job back, right? And so workers are forced under duress to bike very quickly or drive very quickly to rush a little bit. And so all of this then gets downloaded onto our cities. Why doesn't the city have bike lanes to accommodate all of the couriers? Instead of, why does Uber cultivate a workplace that creates an unsafe situation, not only for workers, but for people in that city? I could go on, but what I mean to say is that I don't think that gig work is really about food delivery or rideshare. I think it's really big companies working to roll back long-held, long-won labor rights and protections. And I think it extends far outside of service work. And it's something that we'll start to see moving into many sectors, that's already in sectors I think you are likely not aware of. And typically, these employers target workforces of people who are low income, migrant, or racialized. And they do that on purpose because they think we won't fight back. They think we can't. They think people won't listen to us. A long time ago, Gig Workers United did a webinar with the Ontario Federation of Labor, and it was called "The Gig Economy is Coming for Your Job." And I think that remains true today. No matter what job you do, app employers and people who agree with that vision are thinking of ways to convince you that your standards for workplace safety or workplace treatment should be less than what you think they are. And here in Toronto, gig workers have set precedent. We were the first gig workers in Canada to unionize. We were the first people to be out on the street doing what everybody else thought was impossible, organizing workers who don't have a shared workplace. And even when we were hit with losses, like losing our jobs, we continue to organize and we continue to win. It is possible to win organizing against the gig economy. It's difficult, but our power comes from organizing with workers, worker to worker, worker-led organizing. So I would encourage you, as you start to see signs of gigification in your work, or your friends, or your family in their workplaces, start to talk to your coworkers and think about what you can do when you unite together.
Jennifer Scott, I found that fascinating. Thank you for sharing your personal experience and how you use that as an opportunity to organize workers and lift people up. I also want to take that point you mentioned about how big companies are looking for new industries and sectors to gigify the economy, which brings us to our third speaker. Dina is a researcher with Ontario's largest public sector union, OPSU. Dina, I would love it if you could give us a bit of an understanding of how gig work is changing the nature of public sector work, especially when it comes to the healthcare sector. Thank you so much for being here and joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, this is the perfect segue hearing from Jennifer and Jim, and for the absolute incredible work that you've done, Jennifer, is that, yeah, gig work are sort of this type of precarious, sort of underpaid, casual sort of work that's misclassified, privatized, and deregulated. This is not new, as we have sort of heard from both the speakers, it's just another way for bosses, employers to pay you less and make you work under worse conditions and to essentially eliminate good jobs, often good union jobs, and replace them with more precarious alternatives. So what I'll be talking about today is sort of looking at the gigification of public sector work and how sort of gig work is essentially an extension of something that's been happening for a long time, which is rampant privatization, deregulation, and just increased precarity, and how all of that means that gig type of work will be and has become more prevalent, not just in sort of app-based work or platform-based work, but also in the public sector. And that's some of the sort of early research that we've been doing. So I'll just share some slides and walk us through sort of how we are experiencing gigification in the public sector and what that means moving forward. So let me just share that. All right, I'm just on one screen, so please shout if you have any issues. As I mentioned, for a lot of the members at OPSU, which it has over 200,000 members working across the public sector, from workers at your local LCBO to workers at sort of your local hospital or in the social services sector to forest firefighters. So it is a massive public sector union with over 200,000 members. And what we're increasingly seeing is, with increasing cost of living, with a Ford government agenda that is providing very little relief to sort of everyday working people and is lining the pockets of corporations and businesses, is that gig work it's not just independent work, but it's become a necessary layer of work for many of our members on top of their public sector works. We see lots of members working second and third jobs in the gig economy. And of course, there is a real intersection between sort of the most precarious workers or racialized workers, or workers who are lowest paid, who are working in these sectors, as they are also fighting bad bosses in the public sector. But what I wanted to share most importantly today is sort of the bigger picture, which is how precarity, deregulation, and privatization in the public sector is paving the way for more gig type work, where workers have less protection. They have casual contracts. Even if they are unionized, their hours are being reduced. They're seeing two-tier benefits and two-tier negotiations on the table, which essentially not only weakens the union and our collective labor movement, but what it is doing is that it is shifting jobs out of the public sector into the realm of sort of precarious, casual, gigified work. So what are we seeing in our sectors? Like I mentioned, across the public sector, and health sector is one of sort of our biggest sectors at OPSU, is that we have seen just in the last year alone, but of course this is true from 2018, where a lot of our research has started, is historic layoffs and degradation of working conditions in the public sector. Just last year, we saw 16,000 job losses in the public sector in the last quarter, and over 10,000 of those are in post-secondary education, at a time where most people are looking to retrain in the face of various sort of threats and various job losses across other sectors as well. We are seeing tens of thousands of job losses. And what we also know is that when you lose a union job, those jobs never come back. And that's exactly what we are seeing. As we are seeing these historic layoffs in school boards, in hospitals, as well as in post-secondary education and in LCBO, these jobs never come back. And instead, they go to private hands, private suppliers, or staffing agencies, and they don't sort of recreate good jobs. They create lower paid jobs, but a higher paid contract for the public, for the taxpayer, who will be still sort of paying for these services, but the workers delivering the services become privatized or casual. What we are seeing is also stable jobs are being replaced by precarious alternatives. So more casual work, more full-time members in our union being moved on to part-time contracts, and then their hours are consistently reduced. And to sort of compensate for that, what we are seeing, especially this is notorious in hospitals and in the health sector, is private staffing agencies filling the gap of sort of public sector being hollowed out by the government and its policy and its budgetary decision, but also because of private interests. And it's not made anything cheaper or better, or the wait lists haven't reduced, but the costs have doubled. So not only is sort of this siphoning out of public sector jobs that are unionized into sort of precarious private sector alternatives, but it's costing taxpayers more money. For example, in the health sector, funding for private staffing agencies has doubled, and it far outpaces funding for public sector workers in the hospital sector. And we have a public healthcare system. That just shows you a gravity of sort of the shift in jobs and also funding from public to private. And when it goes to private, it is through staffing agencies, where workers don't get paid more, but the staffing agency charges sometimes 3 times as much as it would cost for the hospital to directly hire someone, sort of in as a full-time employee within the union. So what is happening is a hollowing out of the public sector. It's replacing good jobs with precarious alternatives. And this is not just things we are seeing within OPSU or within our sector. This is sort of happening for a long period of time. So the data that we have here is starting 2018. And what we are seeing is a very intentional, very strategic suffocation of the public sector. And when there is decreased public spending, and this takes into account the most recent budget that the Doug Ford government announced. So when we look at spending from 2018 to now, we are seeing over $672 increase per Ontarian. And what this decrease means for jobs and for the economy is that there is sort of less money to hire. Less money to hire in the health sector, the education sector means more staffing pressures, more stagnant wages for people who are already in the public sector, which is why we are seeing lots of workers and members in our union taking on second and third jobs because they haven't seen their wages increase in 17 years. A lot of our members in the social services sector who are sort of forced to sort of rely on food banks right now because it's absolute decimation of public sector work, by a very intentional defunding of the entire sector itself. And the first to pay the price are workers who are seeing sort of not only stagnant wages, but historic layoffs and a degradation of their workplace. This is an example to show sort of what chronic underfunding means for jobs, and how the pathway from sort of public sector jobs to sort of casual, precarious work proceeds. So this is just a graph from post-secondary education. We're looking at just sort of academic staff in sort of Ontario's colleges. And what we've seen is just in the past 4 years, not only has full-time work and full-time hires plateaued, but we are seeing a steady increase in part-time and precarious contracts. And this is just one small example of one unit of many hundreds that we have here at OPSU to show sort of the real change in the nature of work, and the types of work that's available. So the notion that, public sector workers have cushy union jobs with great benefits is very quickly changing, as we are seeing through intentional underfunding, but also privatization that's creeping in. So what are the 3 things that absolutely stands out in sort of the public sector and within the union is stagnant wages. Again, the reason for this from the government and the agencies is that the till is empty. There simply isn't enough money to fund our public services, but there's lots of money to bring in private alternatives to sort of fill those gaps. So that leads to contracting out, where the funding is still public, but we have private contracts and private companies making profit out of providing healthcare, social services, long-term care, as well as other supports in post-secondary education. And we are seeing increased precarity. And this was noticed if you followed any of the recent labor actions in which OPSU members have hit the picket line. The main demands have been an end to precarious work and part-time work and an end to contracting out. And that is essentially the rally call for making sure that these jobs stay within the union, within the public sector, as opposed to being contracted out, because when that happens, it creates two-tiered workplaces, which makes the kind of organizing that Jennifer was mentioning extremely hard, which weakens the labor movement, because what we are seeing is that we have members working in clinics and hospitals with lots of temporary agency workers, and what that creates is divided workplaces. And it turns workers against each other, and private interests and this government that does not have the workers' interest in mind sort of benefit from this division and this disorganization within the workplace we are seeing. And this is something Jennifer alluded to. While we are seeing the absolute decimation of public sector jobs, we are also seeing an increase in precarious gigified jobs in the public sector as well. It's not just food delivery and ride hail. We are seeing Uber model of nursing. This is something that was introduced recently, where they're introducing Uber for nurses, where and this is in the US at the moment, but essentially, if you need a nurse and you can't access your public health care in clinic or facility because of long lines, you can order a nurse on your phone, and the nurse will drive to your place and provide you care. The similar models have already been used for educational and teaching assistants in the UK, where I was most recently, where for the past 4 years, a lot of schools that are understaffed in inner city London can basically call someone on their phone to send an educational assistant to their classroom to work, often with very vulnerable children. So this is what gigification looks like in the public sector, and it's not in the future, it's happening right now. And under this Ford agenda and under the increased privatization, this is only going to increase to fill the gaps that have been created by these very systems, these very forces that collude with each other. So these are some examples in the public sector, but of course there are many others as to how this model is very directly being implemented in the delivery of public services, which not only reduces the quality of service, but in fact adds more burden to already under-resourced and understaffed understaffed public sectors. So what we are trying to the narrative we are bringing together across the union is sort of the explosive growth in contract work isn't basically a call to sort of demonize agency workers, but to really work together with them, because it's all a symptom of the same problem. A lot of members from OPSU that get laid off end up doing agency work, because what other jobs are available to do? So it is creating these conditions that are ripe for most of the workforce to be in these precarious part-time sort of staffing agency jobs. So it's not essentially union workers against contract workers, but it's essentially going to the root, sort of the upstream cause of this, which is chronic underfunding and shortages in the public sector, which leads to privatization to fill the gap, because hospitals still need to run, people still need care, and that continues on. So then a lot of those services that get privatized, and what that does is it reduces the quality of work for those that stay in the public sector. For example, we have over 100 units in OPSU in the social services sector. So these are 80% women, most of them racialized, most of them work close to minimum wage jobs. And what they're seeing is not only a complete deterioration of their workplace, they work 2 or 3 other jobs, but what they're also seeing is sort of their wages being withheld, because what they're saying is that there just isn't enough money to pay their wages. So, which is another way of saying basically wage theft, that the money that they're owed because of wages that have been frozen unconstitutionally to because of Bill 124 or because of inflationary pressures, these are wages that are being withheld, which then further causes staffing shortages. And we see more workers leaving the public sector as well. So it creates this sort of vicious cycle of underfunding, privatization, wage theft. And this wage theft is also what's been mentioned by Jennifer, that happens in the gig economy as well. So in that way, it's not that different, where only active time gets billed, but any time that is spent driving, finding new work, doesn't get billed. And we saw most recently Air Canada workers demanding wages for unpaid work, to show that there are these tendencies to sort of replicate sort of some of the excess in the gig work into the public sector as well. And as a labor movement and as workers, our goal should be to fight back against these sort of encroachment into sort of organized labor, but also outside of it. And I just wanted to provide sort of some specific numbers as well as to what this explosive growth in sort of privatization and gig work has translated into. We are seeing exponential cost for sort of for privatization that we are all paying collectively. It's not coming from private profits. All of the privatization and the payments for those contracts come from public budgets and from our own taxpayer money. And it also enables the kind of wage theft that has been discussed in both gig work, but also for public sector workers, which at OPSU we are fighting on various fronts. But on top of that, because of staff shortages and untenable working conditions, we are also seeing sort of more workers leaving these roles into more private sector work as well. So I'm just looking at time, and just to wrap up, that a lot of this is not new. This has been happening for a long time. And what we are seeing is gigification is essentially a continuation of sort of privatization, deregulation, and underfunding of the public sector in moving good jobs out or unionized jobs out into the private domain and dividing workers. And often a lot of the jobs that are impacted, even in the public sector, are jobs that are essentially done by women or sort of racialized folks, because this work is expected to be done for free at home. So these are often underpaid and also the first to be replaced. And the way we are trying to fight back, very similar to what Jennifer mentioned, is to organize and to fight back as a united labor movement, as a united organized labor movement as well, that by collating our collective demands to end precarious, unstable jobs, to fight wage theft as it presents both in sort of the public sector, but also outside of the public sector, and defending good union jobs and the contracting out. Because the more we protect stable jobs and good jobs in the public sector, the less there will be sort of precarious work where private companies decide how and how much to pay workers. And then finally, some other ways we are fighting back is coordinated bargaining and bringing common demands together. Because when workers in one sector win, workers win in other sector as well. When Air Canada workers fought for unpaid work, for all the unpaid hours that they worked, it opens the room and conversation to talk about unpaid labor across the board. It launched a scope and sort of an investigation into unpaid work. So that is why we fight together. We bring common demands together to end contracting out, to end precarious contracts, to raise that floor that we've been talking about for all workers. And a big part of that is community solidarity and bringing workers across these sectors to fight for these jobs and also for the fair implementation of labor laws that do exist. That is allowing for wage theft and a lot of this privatization to continue. So that's where we are as a union. We are trying to make these links and fight and organize and coordinate our demands together. And I'll stop there and take questions.
Thank you so much, Dina Nawaz, also for the work that you're doing at OPSU as a researcher. We all really appreciate it. We have some questions that have come in, and we also have some questions that were developed before the call. And we'll be doing questions from now until 8:55. If you have additional questions or comments, please put them in the chat. The first question that I have is for Jennifer. Jennifer, you talked a little bit about organizing. I've personally found it really inspiring. I'd love it if you could talk a little bit more about what is it like to motivate workers to join a union. What have you found that is effective? What have you found that's effective for you to do and say to motivate gig workers?
Maybe I'll start with like a bit of so one of the tactics that Uber uses to control workers, every time that they are about to make a change to the working conditions, so for example, they're going to make a change to the pay and cut the pay by 50%, right? In the weeks leading up to that, they'll start sending out emails, and the emails always kind of follow a script, and they'll say like, hey, we just want to let you know we're going to make a change. This change is going to be so good for you. You are going to love it. You are going to be so happy. You're going to be rich. You're going to love that we did this for you. We didn't consult you on it, but that's fine, right? And then the change comes into effect and you've lost 50% of your wages. Like, that's the reality, right? Or with Skip the Dishes, when they did a similar version of this, they laid off like 40% of the workers in the GTA. Like, there are these massive, awful changes, right? So when I talk to other gig workers and I say, hey, like, do you think that Uber listens to you? I mean, no. Uber is constantly, or Skip or DoorDash, they're constantly telling us what to think about our own experience, that they know better than we do about what we're going through. And so talking with my coworkers about organizing, about what would it be like to have a union? Who can you trust to look out for you? Is it Uber or is it maybe yourself and your coworkers? Like these questions land, I think, much easier than folks in the labor movement expected them to, right? The work conditions are, I think, so poor that when we talk with each other, the idea of uniting together, that workers who leverage collective power can win significant changes, those ideas feel very realistic in a lot of circumstances in organizing in the gig economy, at least for me here in Toronto.
Thanks for that. The next question I have is one that came up in the chat. It is, essentially what is happening in the courts to protect employees from gig work and the decline of employment standards. Dina, Jim, or Jennifer, would any of you like to take that question? Just raise your hand. Jennifer?
Yeah, I can talk about some things. So here in Toronto, a member of Gig Workers United, his name is Saurabh Sharma. He filed an Employment Standards Act complaint against, it was Uber. So he was working one day. The app offered him a really unusually high amount of money to do a delivery. He did the delivery. The app accused him of fraudulent activity, deactivated his account, later reactivated his account, but then because the money had already been paid out into his bank account, told him that he owed them that money. They shouldn't have been required to pay it to him since it was unusually high. And so we filed an Employment Standards Act complaint, which, for folks who aren't aware, is evaluated by an investigator from the Ontario Labour Relations Board. And, she investigated, I think it took 4 or 5 months, and she ruled that obviously that they should not have done that, but she ruled that Saurabh is an employee of Uber, that Uber treats workers like employees. This is not much different than the ruling in the Foodora case, right? So then, of course, Uber appealed, and that went into appeals before the Labor Board. So you can do some research if you like to find documents for that. But I mean, I would offer that jurisdictions all over the world are seeing what the truth is, and there is like sort of ticking clock on app employers, right? There's the Spanish rider law, there's all kinds of stuff from the EU. It just in so many jurisdictions there are legal wins, and there are also organizing wins for you to look towards.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. This is a question for Jim Stanford. Jim Stanford, in the Ontario legislature, I would say we are about 1,000 miles behind the 8 ball when it comes to artificial intelligence and how that is affecting the world of work, including gig work. What impact do you think artificial intelligence is going to have on the world of work and gig work? What are you seeing or studying?
Well, I again would bring my same skepticism about technological determinism to the AI world, as I stated around platform work, in the sense that it's not the technology per se that is the problem. It's how the technology is used, to what purposes, and under what rules and conditions. So, first of all, I'm very skeptical of some of the sort of doomsday claims that AI is going to cause mass unemployment. That has never happened with any other technology in history, and I don't think it's going to happen with this. In fact, right now it's clearly creating more employment than it's destroying. It's just they're terrible, terrible things that the employees are doing, including the people doing the programming, the people building these humongous data centers and all the computers that go into them, and the power sources, mostly carbon power sources that are going to be used to fuel them. So the problem with AI is not that it's going to destroy work or make work redundant. The problem is what is it's going to be used for, who's in charge of it, and what are the rules and protections so that the costs and benefits are shared more widely. So I'm not. I don't think we can make a sort of generic statement about what AI is going to do. It certainly could lead to more, I would say, deterioration in the quality of work rather than disappearance in the quantity of work. But that depends on, what kind of rules and protections we put in place for it. So fighting for through collective bargaining and through legal challenges and through legislative reform for things like privacy on data, the preventing the misuse of our data for things like surveillance pricing, as Abby Lewis was speaking about yesterday, protecting workers in any occupation against the use of AI for surveillance and discipline purposes. Those are some of the things that I think are quite pragmatic. In Canada, of course, it's all tied up with data sovereignty as well, because it is the big American tech companies with their nefarious power and nefarious influences that are leading this process and that are trying to intimidate the world, basically, including big countries like Canada, into accepting their dictates. And that's where we need, I think, a government that is, so far the federal government's been, in a way, I'd say, too rose-hued about what the opportunities are with AI and not contemplating the dangers and the requirement to really stand up to those companies.
Thanks for that. I really like what you said earlier about how technology is just a tool. The real issue is what are we using it for and what impact is it going to have? It gives me hope, actually. I like it. My next question is to Dina. Dina, we're hearing a lot of talk about the pretty drastic impacts that are happening to the post-secondary sector right now, with thousands of workers being laid off and the government refusing to invest enough money into the university and college sector to meet the demand for access to education, which is clearly necessary in this kind of economy. Can you tell us a little bit more about how gig work is impacting the post-secondary education sector and how that could be impacting the quality of learning that students are receiving?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's similar to one of the questions in the chat as well. I think going back to this is not new, sort of moving jobs out, precarious jobs, casual part-time jobs within post-secondary education, especially for faculty, as has been mentioned in the chat as well, is not new, of course, but it did start sort of some time ago, sort of around a decade ago, when these institutions, the way they were funded and the way they made money were changed to basically rely on more private, non-public sources of funding, because the government was starving them of public funding, so that they can have publicly funded spots and stable funding year on year so that they can hire staff and keep staff on board, and there's some predictability. Instead, they have starved the post-secondary institutions, especially in Ontario, public funding, being one of the worst funded provinces in all of Canada. And at the same time, what these universities and colleges have done is taken the approach of relying on basically international students and other private sources of income as cash cows to fill the gap, which, of course, as we've seen, is not only unethical, but it also leads to sort of where we are at right now, where they're seeing sort of decrease in student permits means less revenue, and that's being used as an excuse to now intensify the already precarious sort of work environment that many in post-secondary education has been experiencing. But it's been even more intensified right now, because year on year, as public spending has declined and more jobs have been privatized, the union and sort of organized workers are being weakened as well. We just lost 10,000 workers, as 10,000 workers who were fighting back against the bosses. And now we are seeing sort of a real weakening of sort of organized labor in the sector. And because there's more precarious and casual contracts, it's harder for them to organize. They don't have access to the same benefits. They don't have access to sort of the same level of supports, which creates a two-tier sort of workplace, which again further complicates the ability to organize. So in many ways, it feels like not only the decimation of good jobs in the public sector over a long period of time, but it creates two-tiered workplaces. It reduces the strength of the bargaining sort of strength at the table as well, because the bargaining unit changes so quickly. So as a result, what we're seeing practically, what this means is sort of, two-tiered workplaces, two-tiered contracts, weaken bargaining units, but also we are seeing sort of things like AI and other technology being used as sort of excuses or as justification for why it's okay. Like we'll all be fine. We can fire 10,000 people and have AI fill in the gap. So we are seeing how all of these different forces of sort of technology, AI, casual, precarious work is being combined to create this perfect storm in post-secondary education. And just as an example, one of the colleges, Humber College here in Toronto, just replaced its entire library and library staff with a vending machine. Now, vending machines aren't new. They've been around for a long time. It just provides an example that we don't even need to think as far as AI. These are the kinds of sort of precarity and sort of the complete sort of destruction of jobs that we're seeing in the post-secondary education, where a librarian and a library has been replaced into a vending machine. So that's what we are being faced with in post-secondary education at the moment.
Oh my God, that sounds awful. I've got, I've got another question for Jennifer. This just came in to the chat. And the question is about the process of politicizing gig workers. And the question is, do gig workers make any connection between their experience and the political process? Do they talk about who they vote for? And I think the thrust of the question is, individuals are organizing to improve their own working conditions, but how do you get them to see or move them to changing the actual political landscape? Can you talk about that, Jennifer?
Sure. I mean, I think definitely I can remember times where workers in Ontario were looking towards politicians and government to make changes. In Ontario, the Ford government brought in minimum wage for engaged time. Uber began lobbying the BC government. And I remember those discussions. They were like, the BC NDP are going to have this. They're not going to let Uber get this. And then they gave Uber what they want, right? And, so workers connect our experiences to political issues and to political parties. At the same time, I mean, the Ontario NDP came out real hard for gig workers and have put forward multiple attempts to end misclassification in Ontario, of course, which have all been shot down by the Ford government. But gig work hasn't really been taken up and supported across the board by, say, like the Liberal Party or, big politicians. And so there's a little bit of what I think is fair. Truth that we're going to have to save ourselves. We're going to have to organize ourselves. We're going to have to do it ourselves. And it's great when politicians stand with us. And we do expect governments and politicians to hold the line and to support workers and to enforce the labor laws that already exist. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to us, you and me and our coworkers.
On that front, I would like it if each of you could talk about one organizing strategy or step that you are seeing, activated in Canada that you think is effective in improving our economy and the conditions for workers. Jim, how about I start with you?
Well, thanks, Jessica. I'm going to kind of go old school and point out that collective bargaining in Canada has actually been remarkably effective over the last few tumultuous years that involved the COVID pandemic and then the outbreak of inflation after the pandemic, and then the years after that. And it was a very challenging time for all kinds of reasons. But on the wage front, wages were very much threatened by the sudden surge in inflation in 2021, 2022, mostly driven by companies who knew that they kind of had us over a barrel with the shortages and supply chain problems and the energy price shock, just like the energy price shock we're feeling right now. So that was the key driver of that inflation. And originally it led to real declines in purchasing power, but workers in Canada mobilized, and collective bargaining really got tense and intense, and we had an increase in strike frequency, but we also saw a big uptick in wage gains, and real wages in Canada have recovered from that, thanks to workers, coming together where they have a union and saying we need to make up for the losses that occurred. That hasn't been true in every single sector. But on average across the labor market, it's, I think, a very positive sign that unions and supplemented by strong minimum wages, have been very effective in protecting wages. We're going to need that again because we're going to enter another inflationary surge because of Trump's insane war in the Middle East. And we're going to have to show other workers who don't have the benefit and protection of a union, including platform workers, that this is a tool in their toolbox that they badly need.
I couldn't agree more. Dina, what organising strategies are you seeing working right now to lift employment standards and challenge gig work?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's gonna come as no surprise as someone coming from labor is, a fighting militant labor movement that, as Jim mentioned, sort of coordinates bargaining as well, because the labor movement has been weakened through various attacks by this government, but also by private sort of private interests. Is coordinating bargaining, bringing various units together who are facing shared precarity, and fighting together. And when that happens, we've seen results. We've seen how it creates political crisis for our politicians, but also these companies who don't see big hundreds and thousands of workers coming together to fight them. So that's been historically and even right now our most important tool. But of course, that is not automatic to bring so many workers together. We have 200,000 workers in the union, and they automatically aren't sort of bought into this fight. They have to be won through organizing, worker to worker organizing, and making these links as well, that they are losing jobs, and jobs are so awful at the moment, and it doesn't have to be this way. It's because of political choices and because of corporate greed, and making those links clearer as we organize every worker across the province to raise the bar for not just unionized workers, but non-unionized workers through shared demands, which is another sort of technique in coordinated bargaining or a strategy that has been very effective. So yeah, more of that, hopefully.
And Jennifer, I'm very curious about what strategies you're using right now with your new organisation that's taking a broader approach to lifting the floor on gig work. What are you finding is working for you?
I mean, I think the solution is worker-led organizing. As these jobs change, and they change very fast, some traditional strategies don't work. Organizing gig workers who deliver on apps is not the same as organizing in a factory. And so workers leading the organizing, workers making decisions about the organizing with support, that's the way that we build towards supermajority wins. I think it is not enough. I don't think it was ever enough, but it's not enough to have 50 or 60% of the workers on board. We want to build strong fighting majorities, super majorities that have the power to do more later. And I think we saw that with gig workers. 88.8% of workers voting yes for the union. If that had been 61%, would we have gotten the settlement without having to go to court? I don't think we would have. Would we have still been organized and prepared 2 years later to go up against, provincial legislative organizing? I don't think we would have. I think that power came from workers on the ground, doing the work in our own struggle, shaping what that looked like, and setting our expectations high, that it includes everybody.
Thanks so much for that, Jennifer. I want to, so Susan and the organisers, I'm going to be moving to closing the panel, and I might hand it over to you right at the end. I want to thank Dina, Jim, and Jennifer for your insightful comments, your high-level expertise, what's happening within OPSU in the public sector, and also what grassroots organising is looking like to challenge the rise of gig work. I have found it informative. I've learned a lot, and I've also found it inspiring. As a provincial MPP who gets to see Doug Ford when he turns up to question period fairly frequently, as in I see him a lot, he doesn't always turn up that much. I will continue to push for an increase in the minimum wage, the right for people to join a union and to make it easier for people to join a union, to stop the misclassification of gig work. So an employee is treated as an employee and is paid accordingly and receives benefits accordingly, and to do what we can to replace precarious work with good, stable jobs so that we can make our economy more fair and we can really challenge inequality. The budget's coming up, We're debating it right now. Dina, you are totally spot on. We are seeing some pretty significant cuts in public services, especially education. And listening to you talk about what's happening in London with the rise of gig work and how it is entering the public school system, it just raises alarm bells about what the Ford government, what their plans are for the public service in Ontario. But I'm also inspired by all the organising that's happening to fight back. And if I have one piece of advice on what we can do to improve the economy in Ontario, it's to organise like hell to get the Doug Ford government out in the next election and replace them with an NDP government, which is what I'm going to be organising and working on. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to the organisers just to close out, but I really appreciate you organising this event tonight and participating in this panel.
Okay, well, thank you very much to everyone who has been here, not just the panelists, but everyone who has participated and listened. As mentioned previously, the whole event has been recorded. I think some of the insights are not just very valuable, but are also quite unique and not part of the mainstream of what we are addressing when we're talking about political issues to be considered important in the province and in the country today. And I think they should be. And very clearly, I think we've seen many reasons of why they should be in this discussion tonight. And I hope all of us who have been here and have had the privilege to listen to our three panelists and to our moderator, who did a very good job, and I really hope that you continue with that as the Shadow Minister of Finance. We're going to be, I'm hoping that all of us will work hard to try to put this kind of discussion into part of what we are working on when we consider what are the political issues that have significant importance for the future. Thank you very much, and good night.
And if everyone feels like unmuting, you can do that now and say goodnight to everybody. So thank you all and
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful, illuminating, inspiring evening.
Night from Germany.
Can we watch it again?
It'll be up on the
What
website.
she said.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay,
how can
thank
people
you.
access it, the recording?
Thank you so much
Yeah.
to Jim.
And yay, Jennifer. All right.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Wonderful.